Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets take care of business on their home court 109-102 over the Orlando Magic. Depleted as they may have been, this one was all about one Kevin Durant and an all-time performance from him. We break down the sweet stroke that is easy money sniper, all coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends. It is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, owner-operator of DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings. From DraftKings to FanDuel, he's got you covered. I'm Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy, Andy Mack. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms. And Doug, hey, any way you win it, it all still counts, and it's all a little bit easier to watch when Kevin Durant is putting on an absolute clinic tonight at the Barclays Center.
Yeah, man, 45 points, 19 to 24, 87% true shooting. It's about as efficient as you can ever see a guy get. The Nets needed every single one of it. Just in the other thing that's been a theme for the team for most of this year. But, you know, this is just one of those games where when you have a cheat code level player on your team, then you can just kind of sometimes survive that with not everyone else either, you know, playing their best, or you're losing guys mid-game for injury or whatever else, because that's just how good Kevin Durant is. And I will say, you know, through it all, this game is an example of why during the summer when the trade request went in, you know, when it came down to it, when we were like, I mean, I maybe it was a little bit more me with this crazy thought of it, but it was like, hey, if it's between Sean Marks or Steve Nash or Kevin Durant, get rid of Marks and Nash and keep Kevin Durant, because it's like these games where there's just so few guys in the NBA that can pull this kind of thing off. I mean, it's ultra efficient. No defense can stop them. It's not like the Magic were throwing crazy defenders at him anyway, but you know, it's like one of those games where it didn't seem like it really would have mattered. Like he just was getting to a spot every single time. And when he has this kind of game going and he's fully in his bag like this, like he is just the best player in the NBA. Like that's point stop. Like when he's playing like this, when he brings it to this level, there's almost no one else in the NBA that can bring it to this level. And yes, it's sort of an inferior opponent. Again, 87% true shooting. Like you really cannot get more efficient than that in an NBA game. And just to drop 45, he was already the league leader in overall points scored this season by 15, and he just dropped 45. So it was all Kevin Durant, man.
Unless you are maybe shooting out on the open courts like Doug and I were earlier today. We don't need to talk about our stats, true shooting percentage. It was all strong, friends, maybe for another day. To your point, from a pure basketball standpoint, like this is just what you love to see. It's watching LeBron James. It's watching Michael Jordan in his prime. It's watching Kobe Bryant. Like it's fun to see guys that are unstoppable playing basketball. And that's, of course, maybe your point about the offseason. We were having that discussion of like, you don't give up these guys, even if just for the pure entertainment value of watching them have one of these type of nights.
You just can't replace them. You can't replace this. Like you'll never get fair value in a one-to-one for that season trade for a guy like this. Like you just can't. It's impossible. I hate to like, you know, stumble over it here, but it's just an example of why there is a certain class of player in the league. The list is very, very short of these top tier guys that are just championship cornerstone sort of players, and why you basically need one of these guys to even be in consideration for the championship, right? Like,
I have an interesting one. So we're going to get into in one of these off days here. We mentioned our first 20 game kind of report of where we think this team is. So we'll tap back into specifically that conversation around how valuable a player or anyone of that ilk like Kevin Durant can be. But yeah, you're 100% right. He goes 19 to 24 in this game, by the way, only took 5 3-pointers. So this was also like a throwback performance in that sense, which Kevin Durant, his game, or
by the way, 5 3-pointers, 4 free throws.
Right. Like wasn't going to the line.
Right.
Wasn't knocking down the perimeter shot, or wasn't attempting the perimeter shot, and just did it like, again, this is like 90s basketball. I'm just going to go ahead and work the mid-range, get to my spots. And you mentioned too specifically here, in a matchup like this, for whatever the Orlando Magic are not in this game or in the season overall, they do have a lot of length. And it was like early, the first few minutes of this game, I was like, boy, and Kyrie Irving had it going early too. and then it just became the Kevin Durant show. But I was like, okay, it's going to need both of these guys just because just the size and the length alone for Orlando, you could tell for the supporting cast, there's going to be some problems. There's going to be some issues. And that's where you go, well, where's my full proof? Where's my defender proof? My whatever you think you have, all the size in the world, it's Kevin Durant. And it really was a great reminder of like, this is what unstoppable basketball looks like. And there is, as you mentioned, a finite number of players that can step on the court any given night and say, oh, no, I'll just go get mine. Like, I'll go get mine no matter how you plan on approaching it. And the Brooklyn Nets needed every single one of those points along the way.
Well, because they really just didn't play very well. This is another example of, as a team, this was not a game that you're going to put on the resume for a lot of these different guys. It was not a very crisp game. They had made a ton of mistakes. They had a lot of turnovers. Let's
just real quick. Well,
hold on. I'm gonna go back to Durant. I'm gonna stake it on Durant here, because what I'm gonna say is we'll get into the problems they had, but in general, you can overcome these things when you have a guy that goes like the next level kind of performance. Yeah. Like, this is the other thing that, like, it's like break glass in case of emergency, get out of jail free card, like whatever example you want to use. When you have a guy like Durant on the team and he's going to go to this level, you can just overcome tons of mistakes. Yeah. You can overcome Ben Simmons leaving the game early with an injury, which we'll get to later. Like, you can overcome all these other things. And I think sometimes, interestingly enough, with Durant, it's both a blessing and a curse, right? Because on the one hand, you want to have a guy like this on your team because you can't really get to the next level without this guy. Also, at the same time, a guy like Durant will mask a lot of your problems on a game-to-game basis because he's so good that it just wills you to just continue getting W's when the rest of your kind of stuff might be a little bit or a lot of bit flawed, right? So, like, this is, again, you'll always take Kevin Durant on the team, but I think, like, this is where, like, a guy like Kevin Durant is where I think you have a lot of trouble sort of evaluating the rest of the team at times because he's so good. He plays so many minutes. They have to play him a ton just to, like, every single game because they can't seem to blow teams out at times. And then it's like, well, are they a great team or are they just, like, really good because they have Kevin Durant and a lot of problems, yeah. Right? Like, it's really, really hard to evaluate the team, especially when he puts on a show like this.
And it does come down to the for as good as Kevin Durant can be, having the right pieces for when called upon, right? The other night with Seth Curry, when called upon, can you serve your role? Because 9 times out of 10, Kevin Durant's going to handle that lift. The only other thing that I want to mention too is just about this is in the all-time Pantheon, top 25 scoring performances in Brooklyn Nets history. This one, 45 points, only sneaks Kevin Durant like just barely into the top 20 actually, because he'll be right in the mix there around that level of Kyrie. Well, by the way, there's a ton of Kyrie Irving on this list. There's a bunch of Vince Carter here. Kyrie Irving going back to 2020, 2021, the performances against Detroit and against Dallas. But in terms of just at Brooklyn, being at home, there's only another handful that really get above it. But this is more just a fun little trivia here before we move into some other points of conversation. Do you know the two, probably I would say, most surprising names that you're going to find inside of the top 10 all-time scoring performances for the Brooklyn Nets?
For single game, I'll never get this. I'm so bad at this.
I'll give you the Darren Williams one because that's going back pre-era. Right. Again, and by the way, against the defunct Charlotte Bobcats, 57-point performance.
Does LeVert have like a random like 50-pointer in there? Like,
there you are, baby. Brooklyn Nets 2020 on the road at Boston, 51-point performance for one Karis LeVert. So it's like, just when you look at this though, Kyrie Irving is all throughout this list. Kevin Durant starting to throw them in there. And I remember talking about this back when they signed them of like how many records will start to fall. The top 25 list, give it the rest of this season, maybe next year, and all of a sudden over 50-60% of this list will be comprised by either Kyrie Irving or, like tonight, Kevin Durant.
Oh my! I'm so much wind in my sails for getting that LeVert one right there. I'm never getting stuff like that. We just stop the podcast now.
I held off throwing Mike Newland at you, 1979. Didn't know if you were going to.
Wouldn't have pulled that one. All right. Yeah. Something you are going to want to pull is our friends over at Turo. Turo is the world's largest car sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want, wherever you want it, from a community of local hosts. Browse a huge selection of vehicles. for just about any occasion or budget across the US, UK, Canada, and Australia. Look, forget about the rental car thing. You have to go over to Turo. It's a better selection. They're going to be able to figure it out for all the different occasions or just events you have going on in your life. Turo has a car for it. You can book a spacious SUV. You grab a minivan if you're taking a road trip. You grab a classic or luxury car for a special event, a birthday. You want to show up in style. Maybe you want something affordable, economy car, because you want to get from A to B. Try out one of the new electric vehicles. See if you had your eye on it to see if it fits your everyday lifestyle. Many Turo hosts can even deliver the car right to you. Every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Forget boring car rentals and find your drive at Turo.com.
Okay, so Kevin Durant, epic performance, Brooklyn Nets win. Now, by the way, the Nets win this game on a 45-point performance from Kevin Durant by 7 points ultimately at the end of this, and it did come down to the stretch there. If he had not played, this would have been a 75 to 80-point loss for the Brooklyn Nets. Like, it's not a 1-to-1, points go away, and what does the ratio look like? This would have been far and beyond one of the worst games we had ever seen, and I know Kyrie Irving probably would have done his thing. And inside of that, I'm not pushing this to the side, but let's get it out of the way because it does bring up a key stat. We mentioned Kevin Durant only took 5, knocked down 3 of his 3-point attempts. The Brooklyn Nets were awful from beyond the arc. Now, Joe Harris is a key culprit inside of it. You don't get anything really from Seth Curry in this game. You don't get anything from Royce O'Neal in this game. And this is the supporting cast problem that you run into. 9-17 for Kyrie and 20 points, just to be clear. But it really, in a game that you're playing, not only the Orlando Magic, period, stop, the Orlando Magic without the bulk of their best players. Yeah. Your role guys have to be able to, to take over games like this. Like, as great as the performance is from Kevin Durant, 39 minutes and 45 points, you kind of prefer that Kevin Durant is sitting for most of the fourth quarter instead of carrying the team to a victory like this.
Yeah, look, they're 11-point favorites when it closes at tip over at home here against the Magic. Magic without Wendell Carter Jr., without Bamba, who've been playing the backup 5 minutes for them. Terrence Ross, they don't have Jalen Suggs. I mean, jury's still sort of out on him. It's still better than what they were throwing out there, no matter what. The physicality from the Magic were a problem for the Nets here. Like, as much as these guys maybe aren't, I mean, Banchero is going to be really good, and Franz Wagner is going to be really good, but they're like length. They're length and strong. Like, they're strong. They're strong guys, and that strength was a problem for them. And then you combine like the ultimate length and a guy like Bol, who looks unbelievable. And this team really gave the Nets a lot of problems in a way that, as we've said many times, really shouldn't have been the case. Like, they should be able to outgun a team like this, even with physicality issues, but they're just continue to get inconsistent performances from everyone else. Now, they do lose Simmons after 11 minutes. And that's a tough blow. Like, Simmons has been playing really well. They've been plussing his minutes over the last 5 games by a lot. And just having him go out, excuse me, and with it so soon with the injury is a loss for this team. And it clearly showed, right? They had a super small rotation in this game. Only 4 bench players played, and I'm barely even counting Sumner's 7 minutes off the bench. It was basically just like Harris played 36, Curry 25, and Cam only played 10. So they really just ran, like, all in all, like a 5-man rotation for this game. But you're right, man. Like, they can't hit the threes. Curry was lights out yesterday, but Harris is still struggling. And this just seems to be a continued issue with the team, is that I wonder at times, for as much as Kevin Durant is so great, if there's just a reliance on the fact that Kevin Durant's just going to continue to be great, and that's just going to be the path to victory every game. Because they can't seem to just put it all I mean, they've done it a few times, but they simply cannot seem to put it all together on nights where, hey, can we just shoot 45% from 3 and this is a 15-point win and it's just out of here with 5 minutes left to go in the fourth? But that just can't seem to be the case. And they don't do that, and then they double down with bad turnovers, offensive rebounds, like, or opponent offensive rebounds, and all this other stuff. I mean, some of these turnovers were just brutal, like just letting the Magic back in the game. And I hate to like walk away from a win being negative about this, but it just goes back to the original point about Durant. It's like, what is this team? We know Durant is great. That's solved. That science is solved. Like, the math is in. He's great. Like, we don't need to really, there's no debate about it, right? But after that, this is where it gets so difficult to evaluate the team on a game-to-game basis because Durant masks so much. You can live by shooting 32%, but you're just not going to be able to live like that against the really good teams. This Magic team stinks. They stink.
Yeah.
Like at one point they might be good. They're not good. And the fact that the Nets just couldn't put them away and still kind of struggled to the end is just, I feel like it's going to be the theme for the rest of the season. This just feels like the case with the Nets here.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking about it on the off day here a little bit about where we think this team is and what we think they can accomplish. But this game specifically, you mentioned they matched the Orlando Magic with 18 turnovers in this game. Like, just play cleaner basketball and you win. Orlando shot 13 of 22 from the line, sub 60%. The Nets were 12 of 14. Didn't get there a lot, but highly efficient. Like, you out rebound them by +7 in rebounds. Like, there's these statistical benchmarks as well inside of this game that you go, okay, you did this well, you did that right. The turnovers are absolutely frustrating. And then this is even a game you and I were talking before we got on here about how the last couple of games we said, boy, really strong backcourts start to give the Nets defensive problems. That's not the Orlando Magic tonight. These are better matchups for Joe Harris, better matchups for Royce O'Neal. And they did play better on the defensive end in those matchups. And yet, here we still find ourselves. And it just seems like the exertion of trying to figure things out, and we'll get back to Ben Simmons and a couple other injury updates for later in the week here, but it just does seem like the focus that they're trying to find this rhythm, specifically, it's like carrying it over from the defensive to the offensive end. Maybe it's Seth Curry coming off of his injury. You only play him 25 minutes, but you almost can't have him give you the performance he does one game earlier and then be a total zero in this one. Joe Harris is being epically consistent in his total lack of production, but same thing with Royce O'Neal. Like, it goes down the line here after Kevin Durant and certainly after Kyrie Irving, as he seems to be a little bit just in and out of I don't know, I say locked in game to game or quarter to quarter, and that's not even knocking what he is as a talent. You just don't know. Who do you look to? And we're going to talk about not only TJ Warren, but also Yuta Watanabe. It's like Yuta Watanabe. You know why fans were gravitating towards him? Why I was getting psyched on him? Because he was turning up in the big spots. Like, he was making the buckets when they counted most. They just don't have reliability beyond Kevin Durant specifically, and it creates these bad matchup games. Give me a good team. Give me a good team from the West tonight. The Nets, even with his performance from Kevin Durant, lose by 15 or 20, and that's what I think is really a concern here. They get back to 500. You want to be positive, and also tell me what the solution is going forward.
Yeah, we should title this podcast like, when does a win feel like a loss? Because this is just another kind of thing. And I don't think this is even us trending negative. I think it's just us trending realistic, right? Because yes, look, we can heap all the praise on Durant. This podcast has been the most pro Durant podcast in the history of the world. Like, even through the trade stuff, just go back and listen to it all. I said it at the beginning. Like, you can't get any more pro Durant than we have been in this. Had easily the sort of the harshest takes on like the trade scenario, probably in the entire industry around what was like the net stuff. So it's not even about Durant. It is just about this other stuff. There's weird fit issues. Simmons, again, I'm not trying to put all of it on Simmons here, but when he doesn't play, it's a problem. Like, they're not really built to survive tons of like defensive stuff with him and length stuff with him when he's not on the court. They don't have the players that they feel comfortable playing beyond him, right? Like, they're just, and that was evidence tonight. And credit to Vaughn to some degree about just choosing his path and sticking with it here, right? Like, he just knew that we're gonna play the shooters, Claxton, and that's just going to be it. And it sucks that we're gonna have to play Kyrie and KD 39 minutes each, but we have to get the win. And we're not even gonna mess around with the other stuff. Like, there's not gonna be a Markieff Morris sighting. There's gonna be very little Sumner, Cam Thomas. It's just gonna be KD, Kyrie, the two shooters, and Claxton. That's it. That's the lineup that can win. And I do credit Vaughn to that degree. And it just stinks that he probably feels sort of probably boxed in with
the only choice I could make.
Exactly. Like, right. with the way the lineup's constructed, it's constructed. When you lose Simmons and you don't have Yuta, I don't want to go to see anyone else either.
Right.
Right.
And by the way,
where they are.
Compared to, and then we'll get into a little bit more of the Ben Simmons injury, because there was an update after the game there after he left. Unlike Steve Nash, we can go back to, remember, we used to think, like we said, this is a pinball bingo session where you just pull out a random number and say, you're in the starting lineup tonight. Since Vaughn took over, he's been far more consistent. Now, some of that maybe is built, like you say, out of necessity, but it does just seem like, hey, injury, guy in and out of the lineup, whatever the case may be, once he's picked his path, he tends to be pretty consistent in that decision. And then again, for better or worse, right? Was that lineup maybe the best version you could have gone? Didn't have a lot of other options on the table, but I'll live with the results of the coach saying, this is what I think is our best way to win this game going forward, right? And not waffle on it or find a 2 or 3 bad minute stretch. Even from Joe Harris, he played 36 minutes in this game. I get it. The shot wasn't going down. He did some other little nice things, but there's nothing really to be excited about from what Joe's giving you, but they stuck with him. Why? Because that's what I chose. I chose to go with this lineup for the rest of this game. That's how we're going to go out and win this one. And obviously, even against Orlando, when you get the win, then you can lean on that. You can say, yeah, this is the unit that I trust. These are guys that have experience. A lot of these guys, by the way, in Kyrie Irving, Joe Harris, Nicholas Claxton, Kevin Durant, right? Royce O'Neal's the newcomer. Those other 4 players have played with one another over the last several seasons. So maybe you just lean in continuity and consistency to try to get the win.
Yeah, look, no minutes from Patty Mills here. Like there was definite choices around who is maybe getting rotation minutes going forward, or who's going to get like at least real rotation minutes going forward. And this just might be the case. And I don't know if they're, already having to think about playing like sort of playoff style rotations, because that's where you find yourself at 500 through 22 games. But it's hard to argue with it if you just need the W's, right? Like you're not going to be able to just tread water here through this Eastern Conference for the whole time. So, all right, we want to talk Ben Simmons, what this injury might mean for what news we have about it after the game. I'm sure we'll probably get a little more clarity as the hours go on, because he did leave the game early. Before that, got to tell you about our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain you have the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster, and you're going to like this word, for free. Super easy to create a free job post on LinkedIn Jobs. You just add your job, you put in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile. You're going to spread the word that you or your company are hiring. Simple tools, get screening questions in there. It makes it easy to focus on the candidates with the right skills and experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. Small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs number 1. That's a stat you like to hear in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
Okay, so on the injury front, we said that Ben Simmons leaves this game pretty early. We get the update from Nets Daily and Chris Mulholland, friend of the show, who says that Ben Simmons is day-to-day ruled out for the rest of Monday night's game, obviously due to left knee soreness. Now, just specifically on the left knee soreness piece of this, I had to go back and watch, but like he's obviously already had this once before this season. He's had fluid drains from his knee before this season. Like, the old hasn't played a lot of basketball in a long time, and you projected, we'll talk about Warren here maybe a little bit in a second too, and Yuta Watanabe's update. But when you come back from not playing a lot of consistent basketball and start playing a ton of basketball, this just feels like the natural progression, which immediately stagnates and stymies whatever continuity and chemistry and consistency you're trying to develop in these rotations.
Yeah, it stinks. I mean, look, injuries happen, and they're going to happen to everybody. You're going to need rest days. You're going to need all this stuff. Frankly, the Nets, in some ways, the Nets have. I guess Kyrie sat out a bunch of games, although that wasn't injury related. This kind of stuff will happen to you over the course of a season. With Simmons, it's always super concerning when this stuff crops up, because we have had cascading stuff with him happen in the past, right? He's not too far removed from back surgery. He's talked about the knee pain he's had in the past. So this is somewhat reoccurring for him. Now, it didn't look bad in the sense that, he walked to the locker room. We saw him, and it didn't look like he left. When he left the court, no one, I don't think, thought he was injured. And then you just see a shot of him going into the locker room, and then you get the report about the knee stuff. So, I mean, that from that standpoint, it's good, because it doesn't look like anything bad. But at the same time, this is not new with him either. He's already missed time this season with soreness. And you're always going to be probably catching a falling knife with his injury stuff, because I don't think he's necessarily injury prone, but he has stuff on the ledger here that does lend itself to more long-term issues, like the back, like the knees. And I'm not predicting anything with his injury stuff, but I will say, I don't think any of us thought we were probably getting a full season of health out of Ben Simmons, just because, he's ramping up and this is the way it goes. The problem is that we've seen over the last few games where he's turned it on to sort of a different level with his game, that the Nets really need this. Like they need him on the court for 30 plus minutes a game because he just does too much for their team. Like whether it's guarding the opposing, threes, fours, or fives, and he can handle switches. Obviously, the court vision's been looking great. He's been getting more aggressive going to the basket. Like that's all stuff we were hoping that would continue to build here. And so when you just hear that there's a problem, and we'll see what happens coming up on this Wednesday when they play the Wizards, it just is, you kind of sit and wait at the edge of your seat to know what it's going to be and hope it's not something too bad, and probably recognize that this will not be the last time it happens this season.
No, yeah, there's going to, like you said, the built-in rest days would be fine. It's the necessity maybe for those rest days coming off of little things like this. And again, we're only 22 games into the season. So where are we at 40? Where are we at 60? And where are we, as the Nets fan base knows all too well, where are we as we're going towards the playoffs? And all of a sudden you don't have several key players. The other guys, we already mentioned last episode, TJ Warren targeting Friday. Yuta Watanabe is expected to return on Friday against the Raptors as well. That's a good sign. And I'll just tie it back into what you mentioned about Jacque Vaughn tightening up his rotations in tonight's game. You didn't go to a Markieff Morris. You didn't go to anybody else off this bench. You mentioned Patty Mills, a little bit of Cam Thomas, a little bit of Sumner. I don't know what's going to happen. We can't even bother dreaming on TJ Warren and what it could mean. But it looks like when Yuta Watanabe comes back, well, he's a 25-minute a night guy, seemingly becoming more and more important. And Jacque Vaughn mentioned in the pregame of this one, he said talking about Seth Curry coming off the injury and then also about Joe. I mean, so much of the pregame coverage on the Yes Network was about Joe Harris and his struggles knocking down the shot. Seth Curry talking about staying in your rhythm, etc. Vaughn said he's trying to balance these books, too, of reducing some of the minutes for Joe Harris so he can just kind of ease himself back into it. But you also want the volume, then Seth Curry and giving him some rest. When you just don't have enough bodies, though, it's a tightrope. And now if Ben Simmons misses 2 games, it's going to put an additional strain on this roster before you get to Friday and you get a couple of guys back. So there's a difficulty there. I want to mention something just about Claxton and Ben Simmons that we've talked about. But short term, there's no Markieff Morris minutes to be found here, apparently. There's no Patty Mills with consistency. And I don't hate it. It just means that you don't have as many contributors as you thought you did on this team.
Yeah, and that's not like too different from a lot of teams, but it is just disappointing if that's going to be the long-term case. Look, we have seen some minutes from these guys in the past, so I don't think it's that these guys are never going to play again. But it is a little
spot starts. Their spot.
But it is a little concerning that you don't feel like you can consistently get like 15 minutes a game from Markieff Morris, right? Yeah. Like that's clearly that is, we can say that pretty safely about how they feel about him, right? Like you don't feel like you can get that kind of consistency from Edmund Sumner. Now, whether or not like Jacque Vaughn's wrong in that, like we've seen coaches make mistakes with this stuff to say, oh, those minutes should be there for that player and it should be more consistent. And it's just not. Like this was the Bruce Brown problem last year, right? It was like he was buried. And all of a sudden it was like, well, he's like the third most important person on the team. Now, is that coaching malpractice or it's like something else changed? Like it's hard to sometimes know. The concern is that they don't appear to believe it, right? So like that, so whether they might be wrong, I kind of hope they are wrong to some degree, because that would spell a much better future for the bench and for the, like just the overall depth of this team, because you just can't have Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant playing 39 minutes a night every single game, even against the bad teams. You have to at some point trust some of these guys to go out and just play 15 minutes. Like they have to be trusted to do it. And they're just not. And yes, maybe every once in a while they are, but for the most part, like not really. Like Edmund Sumner, 7 minutes, 11 minutes, 21 minutes, 3 minutes, 6 minutes. Like that's his last 5 games, right? When the team's been on the healthier side. That is not a player that's being trusted with any kind of like real rotational minutes. And there's all these. Cam Thomas is the same way, 10 minutes tonight. Like Markieff Morris, just these, every once in a while he shows up 13 minutes. DNP tonight, 13 minutes. 2 DMPs, 13 minutes, 18 minutes, 4 minutes. Like it's just not, there's no, and look, some of this is because they're a little healthier in these other spots. So I kind of get it. But for the most part, this has been a shorter rotation team. And they kind of just, for a long season, you just do need some of these guys to play a little bit more or have a little more trust that they can go out there and give you quality minutes. And I think what we've seen time and time again is that they just don't trust these guys. Like they just don't, and that's a problem.
Yeah, and the one other thing I mentioned too is like, again, Orlando, why should you have seen minutes tonight from Markieff Morris and 15 minutes from Cam Thomas? because you should have buried them. So these are the guys that should be giving you, to your point, the innings eatings that you need sometimes, because you should be beating these teams more readily. And maybe that's really where their roles truly lie overall. The last thing I just want to mention before we get out of here is you had brought up the PBP stats, when we were talking about Claxton and Ben Simmons and their on-off numbers. And I went back into them, not going to change a lot because there wasn't a lot of Ben here. The weird thing to me, the interesting thing is, when Claxton's on and Simmons is off, it's a 116, almost 117 offensive rating, 111 defensive rating. So it's a +5. That's the only plus rating inside of these iterations of this team. That's 353 minutes. When Simmons is on and Claxton is off, it's a -219. Now, granted, Simmons played so poorly early on in the season, you can make a case that that's probably trending in a much better direction as we move forward. The really weird thing to me is, though, when they're both off the floor, they're a -3, 111 offensive, 114 defensive. But how about this? When they're both on the floor together, it's a 118 defensive rating, 117 offensive. It's a slightly minus number. Like, it's alarming. And this is what you saw tonight. When Ben Simmons exited the game, Nicholas Claxton came to life on both ends of the floor. There is a lack of spacing and functionality for these two players. And we talked about the offensive end, but the defensive end too, to a certain extent, because it looks like maybe like you're marginalizing what Claxton's best value is, or you're trying to pick where you're going to put these guys in. We saw a lot of these late step over assists on the blocks from the weak side when Kevin Durant was the primary defender. Claxton came to life when Ben Simmons was off. And it's just this little theme of a problem here that not only can these guys not play together necessarily, but they're actually damaging themselves and their best usage when they're on the floor together. So
yeah, maybe we'll get into a little more tomorrow, but like,
yeah.
I'm unchanged on this thought process. Like it's been better. It's for sure been better when you section it for the last like 10 games or something like that. But it's only marginally better. Like it's not
the
like
defensive rating is what's alarming.
It's not what's wowing you, right? And they're still getting crushed on the boards with these guys together, even though they're bigger bodies, even though they're slight of frame, but they're at least taller. Like they shouldn't be losing the rebounding battle this bad just based on height alone. And yeah, so I think this is a continued problem. We'll talk more about this tomorrow because we're going to get into just some sort of 22 games in where we stand with this team and just trying to sort of dissect, especially as it compares to some of the rest of the NBA, because we'll go through some of these other teams and take a look at what we think is going to happen with some of these other teams. Because like there has been a lot of weirdness in the NBA this year in terms of like who are some of the risers and fallers that we just didn't really see coming. There's a few teams that are starting to stand out in terms of just like real championship caliber, but then there's like a big mishmash in the middle. Nets are definitely part of the middle group, I would say right now. All right. In the meantime, make sure that you subscribe over on YouTube. This show is going up live on YouTube. Appreciate everyone that jumped into the chat. We'll stay for a few minutes here after, but on the some of these back-to-backs, it gets a little tough. So, but make sure in the meantime that you are subscribing over on YouTube. Make sure you also like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
And of course, when you want wins like this, there's no doubt that Jacques Vaughn turned to Kevin Durant in the locker room and he said, "You're going to eat lightning and you're going to crap thunder." And that's Mickey from Rocky.
One of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
The Post Podcast. I'm going to tap right into this. Obviously, if you're over in the chat, go ahead and throw up the @LockedOnNets if you have a question. Doug said it. Back-to-backs, we'll keep this one a little bit tighter, but Wednesday night will probably be a good one for us to kind of stick around and bat some stuff around, especially as we talk where we think this team is right now. 22 games, will be 23 games at that point into the season. There's one thing that I want to point out here. Ben Simmons is listed as 6'10", as is Paolo Banchero. I don't know nothing about measuring because I'm short, Doug. But when I watch those two guys side by side with one another on the court, Ben Simmons, 6'10", he is not. Like
I think what throws you off about Banchero is that he's just like so thick. Like he's
100%.
He's so strong that he's an absolute load. Like I kind of joked about it, but not really during the game that like the Magic physicality was actually the thing that gave the Nets the most problem because while they're not skilled, right? Really that much at this point. They have no guard play at all. Like I forgot Cole Anthony was out too, right? So like they're out without no Cole Anthony, no Jalen Suggs, no Fultz hasn't played all year. That's like their whole guard rotation. RJ Hampton can't even break the rotation, even though all the guards are dead. But the guys that actually were out there, even like Gary Harris, kind of a load. Like these guys gave them that that core group right there, those three guys, they're Chuma Akiki was out here too. And Mo Bamba. I mean, that guy missed the whole freaking team. But
Literally. They're a 5-win team with none of their starters.
They were giving the Nets physicality problems getting into the lane. Like you saw it on the play that they reviewed with Kyrie, where it was a Kevon Harris and he put his shoulder into Kyrie, and they ended up reviewing it because they thought it was a charge. It wasn't a charge. Like Kyrie had to foul him just to try to slow him down a little bit, try to grab him a little bit to slow him down, and Harris still put a shoulder through his sternum. But it was just like the whole game, you could just see it. Like when they would get into the lane, the Nets had no counter for if they wanted to take it right at a body, especially if that body was like trying to go vertical or something like that. Like the Nets kind of had no chance against these guys, and they're on a run here. It's so problematic. They're on a run here of kind of getting lucky with a few teams that don't have good enough guard play, or didn't like have physical guys, but they're like just not skilled enough. When they get back to facing the Tatums and the Giannis's and this group of player again that are like physical and good,
right?
Like it's going to be a problem. The Nets have gotten. For tomorrow. I'm going on here, but tomorrow I'll make a list. I'll just go through the games of like who has been missing for the other team when the Nets have played them. It's hilarious. Like they've gotten such lucky. They've gotten so lucky with the schedule, and like especially after the first 5 games, it's kind of a joke that like how many guys have been missing for other teams.
Well, and that's okay. So, I mean, Ben Simmons, by the way, he's 240. Like, I understand. I understand that it's
but just look. You saw it. Look at them side by side. Like they're not.
It looks nuts. But and so the point is like, okay, so this is supposed to be one of the roles that Ben Simmons has on the team, but he's not that size guy. So you know that you're a little bit lost there. But then I'll go the layer deeper, and then I want to get to a question that was asked here. But like, Bol goes for 24 points on 10 of 15. Like, that's more frustrating than anything else, because here's a guy that's a feather in the wind, like Nicholas Claxton or Kevin Durant. Like, you should be able to defend and keep in front of him. And it was just the open floor, the transition game. Now that comes off a lot of the sloppy turnovers, and that leads to easy looks. But I mean, we turned Bol into his father here in one game. Like, it was just, it's insane to think that, like, not only are the Nets going to struggle against some of the bigger players in the league, they're also going to struggle against some of the more athletic ones, seemingly, right? Like, that was a lot of what you saw here too, including Wagner. He Euro stepped Kevin Durant going to the hoop at one point, and that's not a knock on Kevin Durant. It's just the reality of like the exertion you're putting out on one end of the floor and then trying to pick up the pieces on the other end. It keeps bringing me back to the idea, and it's weird because it's a different constructed team, but remember, once upon a time, the Kevin Durant-led Brooklyn Nets were about burying you offensively. Come chase us. But now they don't have as many pieces to bury you early. And it's, like you said at the top of the episode, this is the Kevin Durant and see what happens team. Like, not the, and then we come at you with wave after wave of talented guys. They exist on this roster in theory, but we haven't seen it get put together so far.
Yeah, and that's the problem. And I think we're just going to continue to see that different teams are going to cause different problems for this squad because they're a flawed team, right? Like they're flawed. Now, I think there are ways. Some of this is mitigated a lot if they're able to do the one thing that they're supposed to be able to do really well, which is shoot threes on a consistent basis, and they're just haven't been able to do that. Like, that is actually a big problem. A lot of their physicality issues and a lot of their size issues are mitigated if Joe Harris was just shooting 44% from 3 like he usually did, right? If we could get consistent performances from him, if we get if Watanabe was back, like he was shooting way above his pay grade, and he's going to regress for sure on some of those threes. But even some of that floor spacing, like if some of this would just go down at a 40% clip on a consistent basis, I really actually think we'd have a few less problems with this team, because that is how they're constructed. They're constructed to be able to outscore you. And when you're not going to hit threes, it's going to be, all that other stuff is going to look worse. And so I think that's the problem.
Let's go back positive.
I saw this one. I'm so bad at this.
This is good. No, and then listen, we're not going to, I'm not going to break down whether or not I can categorize what his best game ever was. However, just to get back on the positive side of things, a 45-point performance is going to be, he put up, I mean, I'm looking down his list right now for the Brooklyn. Obviously for the Nets, he put it up going back to, was that April? He threw down 55 against Atlanta. But in terms of point total,
he had 53 against the Knicks last year in March. That was during the run where they were just like desperate to win down the stretch, when they were like trying to stay out of the play-in game, or trying to get out, when they were trying to get out of the playing game, and it was like for like 15 games left, not even that much. And so yeah, he dropped 53 in that game. I mean,
17th, so it's 17th all time in terms of scoring performance for him. So because now they've got it slotted in there. But the bigger thing to me was, as we'll talk about, like this is his best field goal shooting percentage of his career in terms of these big game performances, like 79% field goal percentage.
Well, 87% true shooting is like almost impossible to do. Yeah. It's like it means it only goes to 100. I think there was one game where the model got broken. I forget who it was, but like there was some game where whatever I know what the formula is, but like whatever the formula has been written, so like 100 I think is like the highest you can get basically, and like it broke the true shooting model. But basically, if you're like above 80%, if you're above 75%, and that's just so freaking efficient. So
it's a big one. And they said 24 shot attempts. Like that's among the highest that he's ever taken in these big game performances. 28 when he was shooting in the high 60s. By the way, a couple of those like are for Brooklyn. A lot of those, like in these all-time performances, 3 of the top ones in terms of shooting percentage is coming back when he was OKC, right? We're talking about 2010 and 2014. So it's like, let's go back to the premise of the top of the show. This is one of the best talents in the league. And he's doing it 11, 12 years after he came into this thing and started really putting it down.
Yeah, for sure. And like, it just to go back to the top of the show and then we'll get out of here probably. But this is among all the problems with the Nets. It is still like sort of a gift. Like this won't last forever. Like, believe me, we've been through years where this was not the case with the Nets. And there are going to be years, maybe sooner than later, where this will
all the way to the deadline,
where this will be all the way. This will be the case with the Nets again. It's very rare on your team that you have a guy that is like in this class of player. They do not come around. This is why we said, do not trade him. Like under no circumstances. Like, can you trade him if there's other problems that can be solved? Now, some of this might not be able to be solved, right? Like some of this, they might just be past the event horizon on the problems for the team. I'm not really sure. We'll talk about that more tomorrow. But just in general, believe me, 3 years from now, when Kevin Durant is not on the team anymore, and you're watching some of these guys and you're excited and maybe some young guys and blah, blah, blah. Like it's actually very likely. I'll put it this way. It's very likely that you could be a Net fan for the next 15 years and no one of this caliber will ever be on the team. That's just the math. It's just like the math says that like you don't get these guys a lot, right? Like they just don't come around often.
And by the way, Paolo on the Magic, number 1 overall pick, and like you can dream on what he can be or whatever.
He'll never be Kevin Durant.
No. And my point being is like they're a 5-win team. Like you can also get someone who sniffs the edge of one of the all-time greats and get him on your roster. And this is the point about like team building and who's around them. Great. Go watch them be great on bad teams. And right now the Nets are on that very thin line of we have one of the greatest players in the game and we don't know if we're actually capable of being high level competitive in the NBA. Right. So it's absolutely brutal combination, but, we talked about it in the summer and I've said it before and we're going to talk about it here coming up. Like I was definitely willing to dance on the line of which way they should go with Kevin Durant and the trade request, et cetera. And that's not Doug. That was me. But as you said, I mean, I understand the difficulty of having one of them and just saying, you know what, whatever's going to happen, no one will ever second guess me for keeping one of the best players in the league. People will always second guess if you trade or give one up.
Yeah, if you trade them for like 4 pieces of just like bad, like the whatever. The history's riddled with these trades, right? Like if just where you trade the best guy, you never get full value back ever. Like there's going to be a few rare exceptions, like the Anthony Davis trade where they maybe did get full value back, but the Lakers still won the championship. So like it's like everyone feels happy, right? It's just like the Lakers gave up a ton, and the Pelicans, probably didn't get totally fair value, but in the end, it's probably going to be that they did, right? Like, because they're just going to end up with just a treasure trove of assets. Yeah. That's just rare, and that won't happen with Kevin Durant. Anyway, we're getting far afield. We're going to get out of here. Okay.
We're having a good time, Doug.
We'll be back. Yeah. Well, I'm having a good time, but I'm getting tired, buddy. We're going to be back again after we're going to do a regular show tomorrow, and then we'll be back live after the Wednesday game against the Wizards. Wizards will probably be without Beal and Porzingis and Kuzma and all the other good players, because that's what happens when you play the Nets. All your guys sit. Okay. Thanks for everyone for jumping into the chat. We will be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.